Today on a Hamster and Gretel episode of the Danville discussion.
Can you fix it? Can you fix it? Can you fix it?
No, not really. But I figured...
Greetings, Earth creatures! The two of you have been chosen.
Chosen for what?
Chosen to be heroes. We will now bestow upon you powers unimaginable.
Ooh, like the power to fly?
Okay, I guess some of them are imaginable, but most of them
How
are
about
beyond...
super strength?
Yeah, you know what? We're just gonna start bestowing now before you guess them all.
Whoa! I can't believe this!
I know, this is awesome, right?
Use your powers wisely.
Okay.
And use them for good.
We will!
Bye, Mr. Alien.
You hear that? We're gonna be a brother-sister superhero team!
Superheroes!
This is it! This is my destiny! They said the power of flight, right?
Yep.
Then let's go! Up, up, and away! Maybe I'm not doing it right?
It's easy. Just lift your feet.
Wait, where did you get the outfit?
I have no idea.
And where's mine?
Just lift your feet.
Everybody, and welcome to the Danville discussion. This is a podcast that talks exclusively about Phineas and Ferb. Well, that's about to change, as now I am also going to be talking about Hamster and Gretel, so now I have two shows in the Dwampyverse to talk about right now. My name is Caleb Dirksen, and some of you may know me from my YouTube channel of the same name, home of some web series related to animation such as Caleb Reviews. If this is your first time with the Danville discussion, well, the formula is as simple as follows. I go through each episode of either Phineas and Ferb or Hamster and Gretel, and I list down all the cultural references, songs, jokes, gags, some fun facts, and whatever else I can find, and in the end, I'm gonna give this episode a roller coaster rating. So, for today's episode, we're gonna get into the very first episode of Hamster and Gretel, which contains these two segments, Empower Failure and Oakey Dokey. If you want to check out more episodes of the Danville discussion, then go to anchor.fm/Caleb-Dirksen and it'll take you directly to the Danville discussion website on Anchor. You can also share your feedback about the episode we discussed by emailing us at danvillediscussion@gmail.com with the series and episode title in the subject line. Now, to start things off, we're going to look at the air dates for both of these segments. When did these segments first premiere? Well, it hasn't been too long ago since both segments were aired on the same day as one full half hour. This whole episode premiered on Disney Channel and Disney XD on Friday, August 12th, 2022, right after the world premiere of the extended cut of Zombies 3, the third installment of the Zombies franchise, which was a Disney Plus original film unlike its predecessors, which were on Disney Channel, and the extended cut featured a bonus song. And for the sake of the Danville discussion, this was 5 days before Phineas and Ferb celebrated its 15th anniversary. And both of these shows premiered in a similar manner, where their first episodes were aired after the broadcast premiere of a sequel from a Disney Channel original movie franchise, since Phineas aired after High School Musical 2 in 2007. And on that same day, 5 days after it aired, it was one of the first 5 episodes to be dropped on Disney Plus in the United States, with the last 3 having yet to air on Disney Channel then. Okay, now before I dive into this, I just want to mention that when rewatching this episode for this podcast, I watched it legally when Disney Channel put the first episode up on their YouTube channel for free, since I was able to get access to it anywhere in the world with no problem, and not just in the United States like with any full episode that Disney XD has on their YouTube channel. Now, let's get things started. But before we get into the big stuff, this episode begins with a cold opening, just like how Milo Murphy's Law began. And in this cold opening, what happens is that this teenage boy named Kevin Grant-Gomez just got his driver's license for his 16th birthday, but he ends up stuck in this minivan driving his younger sister Gretel Grant-Gomez to and from soccer. And then Gretel shows how fast her pet hamster can go on the wheel. But then the minivan breaks down and Kevin doubts if he can fix the engine. And then suddenly, Gretel and Kevin are greeted by a UFO that chooses them to gain superpowers, and once it does, it flies off never to be seen again. Kevin and Gretel try to use the power of flight, but only Gretel flies, while Kevin is left with nothing, and when Gretel comes down, she magically appears in a supersuit. While Kevin tries lifting his feet to fly again, Gretel also gains super strength and bends a stop sign, which Kevin is unable to unbend because he doesn't even have the powers that Gretel has. Kevin is frustrated because of this, but little do they realize that Kevin's powers went to Hamster instead, because then we see Hamster trying to break out of his cage inside the minivan, and then they discover that Hamster has Gretel's powers too. Gretel implies that the aliens weren't talking to Kevin when they said the two of you have been chosen.
What is going on? They said the two of us were supposed to get powers, not just you. They specifically said the two...
Oh, I get it. The two of us. They weren't even talking to you.
The cold opening ends with Kevin in the minivan being lifted and carried by Hamster and Gretel, and he says, "This is my life." So I already gave out my thoughts on this cold opening during the special episode when I discussed the Hamster and Gretel news prior to San Diego Comic-Con, but in case you haven't listened to this before, I'll replay my thoughts from said episode. So here they are. Alright, but anyways, what do I have to say about the clip? I would say it's decent. Not the best, but not bad either. It's just a solid first look at what the show has to offer. Let's start with the characters themselves, and when it comes to Gretel, I do think she's a pretty fun character from what I saw in here, but unfortunately, because the show is still not out yet, I don't really have much to say about Hamster until we get to some of the promos that we got later on, so maybe there will be more to talk about with Hamster. And I have seen some people criticizing Gretel's voice actress, and in case you don't know, Gretel is voiced by Dan's daughter Melissa Povenmire, or Melly for short. And those people are saying that it doesn't fit the character as Gretel's a child and Melly's a teenager / young adult. But my thoughts on her voice? I would have to strongly and respectfully disagree on that, because I personally feel that Melissa does a decent job voicing Gretel, and it kinda does fit her personality. It's kinda like how Vincent Martella would provide his voice for Phineas in Phineas and Ferb, where Phineas is a kid voiced by a guy who went through puberty the first time, and is now in his adulthood. And I would have to say that Gretel and Phineas both sound as optimistic as one another. They're both acting positive in their own right. But then we have her older brother Kevin, the teenage boy who got his driver's license for his 16th birthday and ends up driving Gretel in his mom's minivan. The only thing I can really say about him is that I kinda see him as some sort of a Jeremy clone. You know, Jeremy Johnson, the guy working at the Mr. Slushy chains who is Candace's love interest in Phineas and Ferb. I do see some differences in Kevin's design, like he has lighter skin, dark brown eyes, and some brown hair in a different style, but I feel it's like they took Jeremy's design, recolored his clothes to match his Mr. Slushy outfit, and altered certain parts to try and make him stand out. Nothing against the people who designed Kevin, but it's just his design could have looked more different. It's kind of similar to Elfo from Matt Groening's Disenchantment, where I often see him as nothing but Green Bart. Like, he's basically a green medieval elf version of Bart Simpson. Plus, I've noticed how scarily similar Kevin's voice is to Jeremy, but that could be just me. By the way, Kevin is voiced by Michael Cimino, who some of you may know from the Hulu and Disney Plus series Love, Victor from 20th Television. And I do appreciate the talent he has, and he also does an okay job with Kevin. The only weird thing about it is that I sometimes get Jeremy Johnson vibes through his voice as well as his design. In terms of the writing, it's mostly alright. Like, it is solid with how it still maintains that feel of the other Povenmire shows, but there are some times where it can feel rushed. I have heard some concerns about the plot point involving aliens, as it was done several times in both Phineas and Milo, to the point that some people may find that it's overused. But at least this time, the alien UFO, who is voiced by Dan Povenmire with his real voice, shows up for a fraction of a minute to give out their superpowers and then takes off never to be seen again. Like, basically, the UFO hovers over the minivan and they say, "The two of you have been chosen, take your powers with you, use them for good, see ya!" It is kind of funny with the lack of importance of the aliens in this show, but it also shows its rushed nature here in terms of how they got their powers. I am hoping that it's not as much of a problem when the show actually comes out. But aside from that, I actually really liked the humor in this. While the jokes are different from Phineas or Milo, they're surprisingly funny in my opinion. I couldn't go a single second without laughing at parts such as when Kevin tries to use his powers like Gretel does, but it turns out they don't work on him, and they don't even know that Hamster got Kevin's powers instead. Those bits were spot on. The last thing I need to talk about is the animation, and this is what people have been criticizing the most here. For your information, unlike Phineas and Ferb and Milo Murphy's Law, where the majority of the episodes were animated by Synergy, the animation in this show is provided by Snipple Animation, which was also responsible for doing the animation in the first part of Candace Against the Universe, the second Phineas and Ferb movie, and is also one of the studios that have worked on the Animaniacs reboot. When it comes to Candace Against the Universe, some of you may remember me doing a review of that film back in 2020 on YouTube and DeviantArt, and this may be an unpopular opinion, but I would have to say most of the animation in that movie really isn't as bad as most people claim it to be. In fact, I would even say it's somewhat a step up from the original show, closer to the veins of something like the Simpsons movie. I mean, sure, it still has most of that TV quality, and the animation by Snipple in the early moments wasn't really the best due to the thick line art and a few off-model shots of the characters, but the rest of the animation by Synergy and Yerim was great. Plus, the addition of more shading on certain elements and more gradient sky backgrounds really made it look closer to a cinematic feel. Also, the reason why the animation in Candace Against the Universe varies for most people is because this was being completed during the pandemic, which caused several studios to shut down and work from home, and Dan and Swampy had to go through those various overseas studios to tweak the animation and try to make it look right. So, about what I said about the Snipple parts of Candace Against the Universe, the same can be said about the animation in Hamster and Gretel in general, where it's not as bad as some might claim, but some parts do feel kinda rough, even in terms of how the characters move. Now, keep in mind, Dan began pitching work on this show back in 2019, both around the time that Milo Murphy's Law ended without cause, and during production on Candace Against the Universe, so I'm guessing this was done during the pandemic as well? I don't know. But I do at least see how it is more understandable with Phineas and Ferb the movie too. But as far as I feel, this clip is mostly alright. But now, let's jump from the cold opening to the theme song. Once again, I already talked about the theme song when I did that special episode talking about the Hamster and Gretel updates from San Diego Comic-Con. So again, in case you haven't listened to this podcast before and you want to know what happens as well as the facts and my thoughts on it, I'm going to bring that clip back, and while I talk about the summary, I'll say the lyrics that connect to those scenes. And here's the rewind. The opening goes as follows, where the title characters are running toward the screen in front of a sunburst. Who's the improbable duo that you've heard about? Then we see them flying past a moving scooter because they are faster than that, and at nighttime they bend a lamppost toward an old lady sitting at a bench reading a book, and she thanks them for it. Faster than a scooter, stronger than metal. Then there's a shot of them with Gretel waving at us and pointing at Hamster in his cage as red arrows appear on screen, also pointing at them. Who's the little girl and her domesticated rodent? Followed by another shot where smoke clears out and the camera pans up to Hamster and Gretel standing on a pile of villains that they defeat, just like we saw in the second poster, with their capes flowing in the air. Who's still standing when you see the dust settle? This is then followed by some action shots where our heroes are posing around various silhouettes, as well as in front of a city silhouette, and we see them flying around in front of a zooming effect. If they can't do it, then nobody can. And some more action shots with silhouettes, and then they're flying towards some meteors. Hamster is sucking on his water, and then we get to the title card, with Hamster, Gretel, and Kevin's poses similar to the first official drawing that was revealed of the show, back when it was announced. Below the logo is the creator's credit, created by Dan Povenmire, in the same font as the Milo Murphy's Law credits, and since the singer said there's also Kevin in the minivan, the last clip they show after the title card is a reused clip from the cold opening of Kevin inside the minivan with the heroes carrying him in it. Hamster, 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 and Gretel. Also Kevin in the minivan. Out of all the opening titles in each Dwampyverse show, this is the shortest, going for about 30 seconds. The Milo Murphy's Law opening goes for close to 46 seconds, and Phineas and Ferb is 57 seconds. Also, unlike the previous two shows where the Phineas and Ferb opening is performed by a popular band with Bowling for Soup, and the Milo Murphy's Law theme is done by the voice of the title character with Weird Al Yankovic, the voice of Milo Murphy, the Hamster and Gretel theme is actually sung by some of the composers and singers who did some of the music and songs for the previous shows, mainly Aaron Daniel Jacob. So that's pretty much the main title. And what are my thoughts on this theme song? Well, the song is pretty catchy, though I have heard a few people criticize it for copying Gotta Get Gone from the Across the Second Dimension video game. I mean, yeah, the beat is similar, but it does have a rather different tune. Like, Gotta Get Gone sounds like here, it sounds more like who's the improbable duo that you heard about? Plus, rather than that song, I actually got more Agent P vibes out of it because of its superhero action feel. Like, this is definitely something that would feel right at home with the Phineas and Ferb subplots where Perry the Platypus becomes a secret agent. It's still a fun, catchy theme song that would kind of fit well with this show. And what about my thoughts on the animation? Well, like with the other clips and promos we saw, they haven't changed here. Like, there are still some flaws in the animation, but it's just okay. You know, it's weird that when Gretel is facing the fourth wall, it can sometimes creep some people out, though I didn't find it as weird or freaky as front-facing Phineas when you pause at the correct time. Like, those frames of Gretel facing us have some sort of meme potential. Like, have captions around her facing forward that say, I'm gonna come at you, or I'm gonna steal your meme, or even front-facing Gretel can't hurt you, etc., etc. Any meme captions like that. But yeah, on one hand, the animation does get rough sometimes, but on the other hand, this is a good theme song and opening sequence. And because it's coming from Dan, I remain positive that the show will be solid in many aspects. And those are my thoughts on the theme song. While it's not quite on the level of Today Is Gonna Be a Great Day from Phineas or It's My World and We're All Living in It from Milo, it's still a catchy theme song that has plenty of Agent P vibes. It's still a solid theme song. Now, our first major segment for today is going to be Empower Failure. And Empower Failure was written and storyboarded by Dan Povenmire, and it was directed by Dan Povenmire with additional directing by Amber Tornquist-Hollinger. So, this episode picks up after the cold opening, where news reporter Veronica Hill is at a well as she reports that a cat is trapped inside. After rescuing the cat from the well, a mission in which Gretel doesn't listen to Kevin's instructions despite Hamster efficiently doing so, Kevin takes the two to the mall for a signing where Gretel sees her friend Bailey in the crowd. Although Bailey notices the similarities between Gretel, the superhero, and her normal friend Gretel, she ignorantly cannot put two and two together because then it would spoil Gretel's secret identity. On the other hand, Kevin has already told his cousin Fred, mostly because of her indifference to people in general. At the comic book store, Fred realizes that Kevin has a crush on Hiromi, who is an employee at the store, and gets the two of them to go on a date to go to the Duck Boys concert since she's actually friends with the guitarist. Then, on the day that the concert takes place, Kevin's phone is hacked by a new supervillain named Professor Exclamation, who declares his intent to take over City Hall with a robot army as the police are also attending the concert and therefore preoccupied at that time. But even though Kevin doesn't want Gretel to do so, she and Hamster set out to stop this new evildoer. Kevin arrives at City Hall to stop Gretel so that she does not get hurt, but Gretel tells him that she can take care of herself and that she appreciates him. And so Kevin decides to sit back in the minivan and watch Hamster and Gretel destroy Professor Exclamation's robots. But then, just as Kevin leaves to go back to the concert, Hamster and Gretel are caught in an electric dome by Professor Exclamation, and it's electric because Exclamation reveals that it runs on the city's power grid. This gives Kevin an idea, and he rushes back to the concert and asks Fred to get him up on stage in disguise as a duck boy in an attempt to send a song message to the whole city to turn on their appliances and every electrical thing they have in the house. And then Kevin blocks Exclamation's path and reveals that he is overpowering the grid. When the power outage spreads across the city, the dome releases Hamster and Gretel, who instantly knock out Exclamation and take him to the police station, where Gretel thanks Kevin for being a lot of help to her, and after that, Kevin arrives at the concert and apologizes to Hiromi because he had to leave in order to help his sister. And Hiromi forgives him, finding his love for his sister cute, and asks that he drive her home. And then at the end of the episode, as Gretel tells Hamster that he has no taste for love, Hamster suddenly talks, surprising her, and flies back home. Now on to the references. The title of this episode is a play on the phrase power failure, which refers to the method that Kevin uses to stop Professor Exclamation and free Hamster and Gretel. There isn't a lot of major cultural references in here, but there is one, and that is regarding what is referred to as a hero transition, where the background is spinning as the hero logo zooms in and out, with a rapid sting playing, and in here, we've got a spinning background with a comic balloon reading, "Yeah!" with an exclamation point, and Hamster and Gretel's faces are zooming in and out at the same time. And this hero transition all began in 1966 with the original Batman series, which this is referencing. The rest of the references that I can find are all from the previous Dan Povenmire shows, because it's the Dwampyverse, and it might as well be a tradition for them to include references to other shows from this world for the new installment. Beginning with Phineas and Ferb, the scene where Hamster and Gretel rescue the cat from the well takes place at Cliffside Park, and there was a signpost for Cliffside Park in the episode We Call It Maze. And when Bailey gives her speech about Gretel, that one boy next to her is wearing an orange and white striped t-shirt just like the one worn by Phineas Flynn. They're both wearing the same t-shirt. Plus, the back of a comic that Fred reads at the comic book store shows an advertisement for the Shrinkinator, an invention used by Dr. Doofenshmirtz, and the specific one that they used was shown in Let's Take a Quiz, though it also mostly looks like the Deflatinator ray from the Fast and the Phineas. And during that moment before Hamster and Gretel take out the robots, when Gretel is confessing to Kevin, the music that plays is an excerpt from the score piece Heartstrings to Hero from Phineas and Ferb the movie Candace Against the Universe, in that emotional scene where Candace feels like she hates herself and Phineas and Ferb give her a mug that projects all of the special things that Candace has done for the brothers over the summer. And there are some Milo Murphy's Law references as well. Going back to the Batman style transition, Milo once did a parody of it with Milo, Diogi, and Perry in the Phineas and Ferb effect. Then when Gretel and Hamster fight the robots, this tune that sounds a lot like Benny Hill's Yakety Sax can be heard. The Yakety Sax tune that I'm talking about was previously played in Milo.
Robot punch!
And during the Duck Boys song Overload the Grid, one of the dance moves that the Duck Boys make is the same as the Lumberjacks during the Milo Murphy's Law song Chop Away at My Heart. And now the only other fun fact that I haven't mentioned is that this is so far the only episode to run more than 11 minutes long. It ran for 15 minutes, and this is an unusual task for a Disney television animation show, since most half-hour episodes are split into 2 segments that usually run for 11 minutes, and sometimes a single episode can be half an hour long for 22 minutes. And because of this length, the segment after this, Oakey Dokey, only runs for 7 minutes. Incidentally, Empower Failure holds the longest running time for a premiere episode segment within a Disney show, excluding shows like Gravity Falls or The Owl House, where their episodes always run for 22 minutes. Now, what did I like or dislike about this episode? Well, for the stuff I liked, I'll start with some of the running gags, beginning with Gretel's attacks. I like the wall punch and robot punch bits as Gretel is breaking her way through the wall inside the well, and later fighting the robots. Also, I like how unique they were by displaying the words in this colorful, abstract style. They definitely feel like something that would come out of a superhero comic book. And just like with Ferb Fletcher in Phineas and Ferb, Hamster usually has 1 line per episode, and he's voiced by Beck Bennett, the guy who also did voice work for the DuckTales reboot as Launchpad McQuack. And in this episode, this part at the end was pretty funny, with Hamster's line and Gretel discovering that Hamster can talk and that he has no sense of romance.
Aw, that's so sweet. You have no sense of romance.
Whatever. If anyone needs me, I'll be in my wheel.
Wait, you can talk?
Aside from the humor that I like in the cold opening, I found these segments funny where Kevin gives Gretel and Hamster instructions, but Gretel refuses to listen and she ends up doing the job her way, like this right here with the 3 rights and a left bit.
Yeah, but you've got me making all these twists and turns. How am I supposed to remember all that?
It's not that complicated. It's just 3 rights and a left.
3 rights is a left. I think I should just go straight.
Gretel, which way is Hamster going?
Hamster's following your twisty-turny thing, but I bet I can beat him there.
Gretel, no! Just...
And when the water hits Gretel, Kevin tries to move the boulder that's trapping the well, but he doesn't have the super strength to do it, accompanied by the running gag in form of a news report from Veronica Hill.
If you're just joining us, Hamster and Gretel have entered the pipe, but the water main has burst.
We've got to let
In a related story, a scrawny 16-year-old boy is using his tiny muscles, not helping in any way whatsoever.
It even made me laugh immediately after they save the kitten when Hamster throws the water out of his mouth and it sends Kevin back into the minivan.
Gretel, what did you do when the water main burst?
Oh, that was easy. Hamster just drank all the water.
Wow, he must have been very thirsty.
Then there's this nice, cute, funny part right here where they're at the mall appearance and Bailey is comparing the normal Gretel to the superhero Gretel.
This question is for Gretel. My best friend looks just like you, and her name is Gretel, just like you, and she has a hamster named Hamster, just like you. I just want to know, can you sign this t-shirt for her?
Oh, sure, Bailey.
Yes, she's gonna love it so. Wait, how do you know my name?
Superpowers?
That is awesome!
Another moment I thought was nice was when they're at the comic book store and Hiromi asks about the tickets to the Duck Boys concert and Fred says that she can't go, but she can give the tickets to Hiromi and Kevin, thinking they could go together, and that was cute since Hiromi is Kevin's crush.
I bet you got tickets.
I did, actually. 2 of them. But as luck would have it, I can't go. I was gonna give my cousin Kevin here one of them. Would you like the other one? You guys could go together.
As soon as Kevin and Fred walk out, Gretel says she had to sign a t-shirt to herself because Fred is the only person other than Kevin who knows of Hamster and Gretel's secret identities. And then what made me chuckle was when Gretel asks what's wrong with Kevin when she looks at a stunned Kevin, and Fred responds, I don't know, puberty?
Did you guys see that? Bailey was there, and I had to sign a t-shirt to myself. Wow, so meta. What's wrong with Kevin? I don't know. Puberty?
And these jokes when Professor Exclamation first appears were good, with the lighting on his face and the explanation of his name, the fact that he literally has an exclamation point on his head.
This is a message for the... Wait, why is my face dark? I'm just gonna... No, that's the light for the backdrop. So this here must be the... Ah! There! This is a message for the so-called superheroes, Hamster and Gretel. Let's see if you're hero enough to save City Hall from my army of evil robots. That's right. Come on down and test your mettle against me, Professor Exclamation. I've got an exclamation point on my hat.
Especially the welcome to your doom bit, that was nice too. Now that I really think about it, Professor Exclamation in general is a funny villain.
Ah, welcome Hamster and Gretel. Welcome to your doom.
The song number Overload the Grid is catchy too. I like how Kevin uses it to break all the power in the city as a method to free Hamster and Gretel and stop the villain. I even listened to it on the soundtrack album with YouTube Music after watching it.
Turn it on. Keep it going. That's what you heard the kid. Thanks, Fred. Let's hope it works.
Even when he finally outsmarts Exclamation, giving out an exposition about what happens when everybody uses their appliances at the same time and the blackout happens, that was cool.
The only thing special about you is your sister and her pet. And I've got them both trapped.
In a trap that feeds off the city's power grid. Yes, I heard. But you know what happens when everybody uses their appliances at the same time? A blackout. And that shuts off the power to your little trap.
Many of the characters are fine as well. Gretel is optimistic and she even has ADHD, which is nice. Hamster is just a comic relief hamster, but still likable. Kevin is somewhat the straight man in this with how he can be a little moody at times. Fred is deadpan and monotone in a good way. Veronica can be funny with her news reports. Bailey is a cute best friend character with plenty of personality. And I already talked about how Professor Exclamation is a witty villain kinda like Dr. Doofenshmirtz. Even their voice acting is pretty good. Melly Povenmire, one of Dan's daughters, while she may sound more mature as she's a young adult, does sound optimistic when she's voicing Gretel. Beth Bennett is also good as Hamster, and I sometimes hear a hint of his Launchpad McQuack. I get Marty McFly or young Luke Skywalker vibes every time I hear Michael Cimino voicing Kevin, and he does a great job too. But like with the cold opening that ties into this segment, the animation does look weird and rigged at times, though I wouldn't say it's nearly as bad as some say. And this is regarding the fact that this episode was animated by Snipple Animation, whose only other work on a Dwampyverse project was back in 2020 with the first part of Phineas and Ferb Candace Against the Universe. So it is noticeable that Snipple doesn't have much experience with the Dwampyverse, and I can pretty much say the same thing there too. Sometimes the heads can move weird, the mouths can move weird, the arms can move weird. It does sometimes feel rushed. Also, the spaceship in the opening barely has any outlines on the exterior, so it doesn't look as detailed, making it look rather bland, and it looks more like a computer trackball or an easy button. I'll explain more about it when I get to Oakey Dokey. Also, during the song Overload the Grid, there's a recycled dance move that the Duck Boys are making, and that's taken from the Chop Away at My Heart music video from Milo Murphy's Law with the Lumberjacks. Maybe it's because they had to cut some costs when making the pilot, but I can't help but see how scarily similar that part is. and I don't really mind Gretel's design too much like some people do. She does look okay, and they even said that Dan designed Gretel slightly outside of his usual style to accentuate her cuteness, which is understandable, especially with some other characters in Gretel's class like Bailey, who gives out her speech. But with Kevin, like I said, he does look somewhat bland in terms of design. He looks more like a clone of Jeremy Johnson, except with some changes here and there. But again, it's not the artist's fault, and they did their best trying to design Kevin. And it will take time to get used to, that I know. But for now, I can only see the Jeremy clone on the outside of him. But now, let's get into the other stuff that I didn't really like in here. Let's start with some of the score. Some of the score used in this episode is completely recycled from other Dwampyverse installments, and not much original score other than the instrumental version of the theme song, and it sometimes doesn't work here. In the cold opening, as Hamster is running on the wheel, they recycle a score piece from the Milo Murphy's Law episode Missing Milo, as Milo is shoving Diogi out of the time vehicle that Cavendish and Dakota take with them.
Just like Hamster. But if I hold him up like this, he thinks he's running super fast. Look at him go.
No, Diogi, you're not supposed to be in the limo. Go on, go home. Oh, guys, I almost forgot.
And later on, when Kevin feels worried and Gretel is giving an explanation for why she and Hamster can take on Professor Exclamation and the robots on their own, they reuse that excerpt from the Candace Against the Universe score piece Heartstrings to Hero that I mentioned earlier, and honestly, it doesn't really work here. In Candace Against the Universe, that score makes total sense to be used because that music is meant to set up what I would consider the most heartfelt, emotional moment in the movie, as Candace has a breakdown and Phineas and Ferb try to cheer her up with the mug that then shows all the things she did with them that made Candace so special to them in the first place. Here, however, I don't see the point of using that score for this scene. Maybe they could use it for an actual emotional scene in the show, but yeah, there was no point to even use it here.
Gretel, I'm trying to... You're my little sister. I mean, I know you got all these powers now, but it's my job to look out for you. I'm your big brother.
Aw, Kevin, you're a great big brother. You've been looking out for me my whole life, but things are different now. You've got superpowers. Me and Hamster, we've got this.
You're right. You've got this.
Candace, you need to open our gift.
The gift! Oh, you were even trying to give me a gift and I wouldn't take it. I'm so horrible.
Please, Candace, open it.
You got me a coffee mug? And I don't even drink coffee! I can't do anything right!
Push the button, Candace.
The score is a major problem for this pilot as it keeps the show away from finding its own identity, which is also a minor issue with Milo Murphy's Law with how it used the Phineas and Ferb characters, specifically Dr. Doofenshmirtz. Don't get me wrong, I like the development that Doof had in that show, but for Pete's sake, just let Hamster and Gretel breathe and have some time to be its own thing, especially with the score that you're using and before you even decide to make a crossover between all three shows. And speaking of letting the show breathe, let's go over to the biggest problem with the episode, the pacing. The pacing is so rushed during a majority of the episode, and like I said before, the cold opening is one example. This is not counting the aliens that give the superpowers to Hamster and Gretel, because from the looks of it, it might turn into a full-on plot point in the show, but I'll look into that later. But as soon as we get past the cold opening, it feels like a lot of time has passed since Hamster and Gretel have gained recognition immediately afterwards, with zero build-up to the city's reaction at all. They do jack squat with how they became recognized. They could have put in a plot point where Hamster and Gretel become well known after their first mission, in which they foil a bank robber or something like that, and then it would have made more sense. It really felt like some scenes were missing in this segment, and the runtime of both segments, with this segment being 15 minutes and the other being 7 minutes, That doesn't make sense at all since the pilot episodes of Phineas and Milo were even in terms of the runtime on both segments from those pilots. This definitely should have been a 22-minute episode instead, and the second segment should have been paired with another 11-minute episode and made 11 minutes long as well. But yeah, I'm certain that the future episodes are gonna fix that, but this feels so uneven. But even at that, my positives do outweigh the negatives, and this was still a decent episode. Even though it has issues with some of the animation and the score, and especially the pacing, there are some good things to be found in the animation. The voice acting is nice, the humor is well timed, the characters are likable, the villain was a lot of fun, the songs themselves are a bop. Not the best start, but it is still a fine start for the show. Now for our next segment, I am moving on to Oakey Dokey. And Oakey Dokey was written by Dan Povenmire, it was storyboarded by Dan Povenmire and Rufino Roy Camacho II, and it was directed by Dan Povenmire with additional directing by Trisha Garcia. And now, the plot of this episode is that in the downtown area, a popcorn factory is on fire as the fire department tries to take it out only for the water of the hydrant's pressure to fail when the dynamic superhero duo of Hamster and Gretel come to their rescue, and despite Kevin's clear instructions that they should use a more powerful fire hydrant, Gretel punches the water tower and puts out the blaze with help from Hamster, who lifts a vehicle to aim the water toward the burning factory. This results in a chain reaction where the tower's cover breaks off a satellite solar panel, causing the Grant-Gomez family's GPS systems to go offline. Gretel, Hamster, and Kevin go over to a picnic with their said family, where Gretel meets with Bailey over the old oak tree that they call Okie, which was incidentally the location where they became best friends on that one kindergarten field trip long ago. Meanwhile, the tower's cover strikes a meteor, setting it on a crash course towards Earth. And this immediately concerns Fred, who calls up Kevin to tell him about the threat, and then Kevin informs Hamster and Gretel to go to the nearest bandshell to use it as a ramp to launch the meteor skyward. But he forgets that Gretel's solution is to punch, 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 and so she does exactly that when the meteor gets to her. The meteor successfully goes backwards, but a chunk of the meteor breaks off and crashes straight into Okie, thereby destroying it, and this upsets Gretel. While Kevin goes on about Okie not being able to be fixed with superhuman strength and speed, Hamster and Gretel get to work doing exactly that by gluing all the parts back together with the extra tough kind of glue. Kevin is surprised and confesses about his frustrations about Gretel just not listening to him to Fred, while letting them go, as Gretel offers him a ride, and then Kevin hangs up just as Fred is about to make another roll with the punches joke, because Gretel made one earlier. And it ends the same way as the cold opening, except instead of being unamused, Kevin is actually fine with his life and he puts on his sunglasses. And speaking of the cold opening, there's a bonus ending scene that goes in a similar manner to how Hamster and Gretel got superpowers, in which two teen siblings by the names of Lauren and Lyle are stuck with a broken down car when they encounter the same aliens that gave Hamster and Gretel their powers, and the aliens grant superpowers to the two as well. But this time, the aliens tell them to use their powers for evil, and that's how they became two new supervillains, the Destructress and Fist Puncher, who won't have a major role until later, which explains the to be continued credit at the end. Well, I couldn't really find any other cultural references in here, but there are a couple references to the previous Dwampyverse shows. First off, there's a Phineas and Ferb reference where as Gretel makes her meteor punch, the meteor is heading towards Totally Tools, a company that was shown in the episode Perry the Actorpuss. And for Milo Murphy's Law, the fire chief bears a lot of resemblance to Richard Chase, another firefighter who is Melissa's father. Yet it could be him. However, I can see that he is colored differently, and his voice is different because he's voiced by Dan Povenmire instead of Adrian Pasdar. But this could lead me to believe that it might even be Richard's cousin. I don't know.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. Milo, you weren't here at the fish hatchery this morning, were you?
Dad?
It's a good thing it's been evacuated because it would take a miracle to put this fire out now.
And I've already brought up this fun fact that this is only 7 minutes, while Empower Failure is 15 minutes compared to your even half-hour episode, which is split into 2 segments that usually go for 11 minutes. But there aren't really any other fun facts right now, so I'll just move on. Now, for the stuff that I liked or disliked, some of my pros and cons about the first segment do carry on to here, where I like the characters and the jokes, such as the running gag of Gretel's attacks, where she announces her water tower punch and her meteor punch. But some of the animation does look rather cheap, and the pacing does feel rushed, as I mentioned in regards to the story and the runtimes. Like I said, the previous segment should have been a full half-hour episode so that it could tell more story about the aliens giving out the superpowers, as well as how Hamster and Gretel became recognized by the town, and this should have been 11 minutes and paired up with an additional segment. But, on the other hand, the animation does look like it improved a bit more, since this segment was also done by Synergy Animation, which is the same studio that worked on several episodes for Phineas and Milo. They're like the best studio to provide the animation for the Dwampyverse, since their animation looks smooth, and compared to Snipple, they draw the frames on paper first, then scan them to a computer, and digitally draw the frames one by one. Even the alien spaceship at the end looks like it's more detailed as they're giving Lauren and Lyle their evil superpowers. Synergy actually fixed the issues that were shown in the cold opening of Empower Failure by Snipple. Not only does it float properly, but there are more outlines on the base of the UFO to make it look more three-dimensional, and even make it look like an actual alien spaceship and not like a computer trackball. And now, going on to the rest, this repeated gag occurred to me where Kevin gets blasted backwards by the fire hydrant as soon as Gretel punches the water tower open and Hamster directs the water toward the building, and that caught me there.
Wow, young man, you almost got drenched.
Yeah, that was close. You should have seen yes.
I also found this part funny with Gretel's roll with the punches joke.
Look, Gretel, you gotta take my instructions more seriously. One day there's gonna be a problem you can't fix with the punch.
You've got to learn to roll with the punches. See what I did there? 'Cause I fixed it with the punch.
I get it.
And then Gretel goes over to Okie to find Bailey, which leaves Kevin responding, "Yep, they named the tree." His sarcasm made me chuckle too.
Where's Bailey?
She's waiting for you over by that tree you like.
Okie!
Yep, they named the tree.
The part where Gretel and Bailey declare themselves the queens of the tree while climbing up Okie I thought was cute.
Remember the kindergarten field trip? That's when you and I became best friends, on that branch right there.
And look at us now!
The queens of the tree!
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 The next funny moment was the short video call from Fred when Kevin wakes up.
What?
Oops, sorry, wrong number. I was looking for my nice cousin Kevin who doesn't yell at me when I call him with information about impending disasters.
What's happening? We've got a situation!
When Okie gets destroyed by part of the meteor that Gretel smashes, we get the Batman-style transition once again, but this time it slows down, and Hamster and Gretel's faces are zooming in slowly, looking sad because the meteor destroyed Okie. And this somber tune plays as this is happening. This would have to be the funniest joke in the entire segment.
Well, a chunk broke off, but it's heading away from downtown towards the... Okie!
By the way, I forgot to mention that this transition is used throughout the show when I was talking about Empower Failure. And while Hamster and Gretel are fixing Okie with their superhuman strength and speed, and also glue, there's this nice joke which is also accompanied by a line from Hamster.
Maybe we've learned a lesson here today. Maybe sometimes there are consequences to our actions. Consequences that cannot be solved with just superhuman strength and speed and... What?
Look! We fixed it with our superhuman strength and speed.
And glue.
And glue! We'll see you at home.
They then bring back the roll with the punches joke from earlier, but this time, Fred says it during another video call between her and Kevin.
It's just that she never listens to me.
but you saved the city.
I guess it was pretty cool.
Dude, you gotta roll with the punches. See what I did there? Because she punched.
I get it.
Another thing they brought back as soon as Gretel and Hamster fly back over with the minivan is the last part of the cold opening where Kevin says, "Yep, this is my life," except instead of feeling annoyed, he's actually cool with it and he puts on some sunglasses, and that was another nice moment there. The Meanwhile Elsewhere bit gave me a chuckle with the narrator, and the ending was cool where Lyle and Lauren are granted superpowers by the same UFO from earlier to use them for evil, and they become Fist Puncher and the Destructress, which leaves plenty of foreshadowing and questions to be answered. Trust me, I'll tell you more about them when we get to episode 3 of Hamster and Gretel with superhero sibling rivalry.
Use your powers wisely, and use them for evil.
Wait, did he just say evil?
That's what I heard.
Yes, specifically evil.
Oh, so cool.
Let's wreak some havoc.
Plus, Brock Powell and Allison Stoner give off a radical performance as the two. Brock Powell is the same guy who voiced some characters in Milo Murphy's Law, Candace Against the Universe, and some Mickey Mouse projects for Disney Junior such as Mickey Mouse Mixed Up Adventures, which used to be called Mickey and the Roadster Racers in its first 2 seasons, and Mickey Mouse Funhouse. And Allison Stoner is the same person who's done voices for Phineas and Ferb as Isabella and Jenny, Milo Murphy's Law as Lydia, and The Loud House as Sam Sharp. But that's all there is to say here, and like with the previous segment, it does have some pacing issues and it could have been longer, but it still has some likable characters, some good humor, and the animation does have some improvements thanks to Synergy's involvement. So once again, it's decent. Now, our last part is the credits. But funny enough, I don't even need to say what happens during the credits sequences of Hamster and Gretel because they're in the exact same style as the credits of Milo Murphy's Law. You've got these random shots of the episode overlapped by a white tint, you've got the credits in the Cooper black font and black color just like Milo, and you've got the theme music playing in the background. And the theme music that plays in the credits is an extension of said theme song, which can actually be heard in the full version that appears on the show's soundtrack album. Yeah, this makes me wonder why Milo didn't even get a soundtrack album and only had a few songs released publicly. Another thing to note is that now there are more song credits, not just limited to the theme song, and all I gotta say is, thank you for crediting all the songs for once, they deserve it. But on Disney Channel airings, they have the credits play over the last scene of the episode nowadays, which kind of feels off. It's not just Disney Channel doing this most of the time with their animated series. Nickelodeon has been doing that as well. But that's what needs to be said about the credits, so if you're expecting me to talk about the credit sequences when talking about Hamster and Gretel or even Milo Murphy's Law when I get to that, I don't need to because they're the same credits. Now finally, to end this off, I'm going to be going into the roller coaster rating. So, out of 10 roller coasters, what am I going to give these segments and the whole episode? I think I'll give Empower Failure a 7 out of 10. I like a majority of the humor, most of the characters were fun, as well as the villain, even that boy band song was pretty catchy, and some of the animation from Snipple was okay. But there are issues that keep it away from being the best start to the show, like how long it goes compared to your average 11-minute segment. It made it too long, and it doesn't help either with the pacing because some of the pacing feels rushed with the UFO and Veronica Hill knowing Hamster and Gretel just immediately after the opening sequence, when they could have gave the main characters more time to be beamed up to the UFO and waited a few minutes before giving them their superpowers, and they could have gave more context surrounding Hamster and Gretel's first mission and how they ended up becoming recognizable to the city, and that would have made just this one episode a half-hour long, which means the second segment would be cut and paired with another produced episode. Plus, some parts by Snipple feel sort of weird, and they mostly recycle some of Danny Jacobs' score from previous Dwampyverse projects, some of which feel out of place in certain scenes. Not to mention that a dance move from Chop Away at My Heart from Milo was recycled for the Duck Boys song. And for Oakey Dokey, I'm also giving it a 7 out of 10 because, again, I like the humor and characters. The animation looks a bit more smooth here, as this time some of it was also done by Synergy. I even like seeing some references to other Dwampyverse media, just like with the previous segment. But due to the length of the other segment, it felt a little too short, and again, the pacing is rushed. So, in total, this premiere episode of Hamster and Gretel gets a 7 out of 10 from me. It's not the best start to the show, and the pacing could have easily been fixed, but it was still a decent episode, and I'm sure it'll really pick up from here with the more episodes I watch in the future. So, how serendipitous. And now it's time for the Twitter poll results from 1.5 weeks ago. And to give you the results of our voting, here is our reporter.
Hello, listeners. It's that time again. Time for more Twitter poll results from me, your reporter. We asked our listeners, what is your favorite invention by Dr. Doofenshmirtz? Hashtag Phineas and Ferb, hashtag Danville discussion poll. The choices were A, the magnetism magnifier, B, the drillinator, C, the deflatinator ray, or D, the destructinator. 0% answered the deflatinator ray, so nobody chose that. 17% picked the drillinator. 33% said it was the destructinator. But with a whopping, astounding 50%, behold the magnetism magnifier, the winner of this poll! This makes us all feel nice and delighted, yet is also sending a 2-ton ball of tinfoil traveling 200 miles an hour directly at us! I better hurry up right now before the ball crushes me! There were 6 votes in total. Now back to Caleb to give you his choice and the new Twitter poll. This is the reporter signing out!
Thanks, reporter. Now, which would I say is my favorite invention by Dr. Doofenshmirtz out of all those 4? My pick would go towards the magnetism magnifier. Basically, you put it with a magnet and cover an entire metropolis with a metallic foil, and it'll pull the Earth's rotation backwards. And the way Doof used it in Roller Coaster was very funny. He tries to pull the eastern seaboard to reverse the Earth's rotation, but fails, as all the tinfoil gets lifted off to form a giant 2-ton ball, and it ends up hitting Doof when Perry escapes on the helicopter. But now, let's start a new Twitter poll. And this one is going to be unrelated to Hamster and Gretel right now because there isn't much more for me to say until I talk about its forthcoming episodes. For this one, we're asking our listeners, how were you first introduced to hashtag Phineas and Ferb? Hashtag Danville discussion poll. And here are the choices. A, Disney Channel, B, Toon Disney or Disney XD, C, Disney Plus, or D, Other. Please reply. So if you first watched the show on any other network or platform, you can comment on Twitter, and it can be anything, whether it be the compilation DVDs, the digital downloads, Family Channel until 2016, if you live in Canada that is, anything on which you first watched the show. So go on to Twitter and search for my alternate page at Caleb the PNF Guy or hashtag Danville Discussion Poll, and then you can spread the word to us by picking your vote. And that's all I've got for this week, so thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Danville Discussion. As for me, you can find me on my Facebook page at Real Caleb Dirksen, on my Twitter, Tumblr, and TikTok pages at Caleb Dirksen2 with the number 2, on my alternate Twitter page at Caleb the PNF Guy, on my Instagram pages at Caleb.Dirksen for my main page or Caleb Flynn Fletcher for my alternate page, and on my DeviantArt page at Caleb Dirksen20. You can also find me on Discord by entering the username Caleb Dirksen in 2 words, and then the code number 4600. If you go to the invite link in the description below, it'll also invite you to my Discord server so that you can talk with me about anything, including this podcast or my other content. And you can also find me on my YouTube. Just search for Caleb Dirksen and look for the icon of me as a soldier. As for this podcast, we are available to listen on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and you can also find us on Anchor by using your Apple or Android device or going on the web at anchor.fm/Caleb-Dirksen. It'll take you directly to the Danville discussion page. If you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or another podcast device, could you do us a favor and please rate and review this podcast? That would be very nice so long as it's respectful and not a case of cyberbullying. But if you are listening to this as a video on YouTube, then go and push that like button on our video and leave us a little comment with your thoughts about this episode that I've talked about. And you can also share your feedback by emailing us at danvillediscussion@gmail.com with the series and episode title in the subject line. Join us next week, and I'm gonna get into episode 4 of Phineas and Ferb with Are You My Mummy and Flop Stars. Tune in next week for the latest episode of the Danville discussion and all things related to Phineas and Ferb and beyond. And with that said, thank you so much once again for listening, and until next week, this is Caleb, over and out. This podcast was created strictly and only for entertainment and information purposes. It is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company, Disney Television Animation, or their affiliates. All and any names, images, clips, sounds, or other items related to Phineas and Ferb, Milo Murphy's Law, Hamster and Gretel, and other Disney properties are trademarks and or copyrights of their respective holders. All original content from this podcast is the intellectual property of the Danville discussion and the host or hosts running the podcast unless otherwise noted.
Yep. This is my life.